Government exists to protect us from each other. Where government has gone beyond its limits is in deciding to protect us from ourselves. The greatest leader is not necessarily the one who does the greatest things. He is the one that gets the people to do the greatest things. There is no limit to the amount of good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. The most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I have left orders to be awakened at any time during national emergency, even if I'm in a cabinet meeting." Christmas can be celebrated in the schoolroom with pine trees, tinsel and reindeers, but there must be no mention of the man whose birthday is being celebrated. One wonders how a teacher would answer if a student asked why it was called Christmas. How do you tell a communist? Well, it's someone who reads Marx and Lenin. And how do you tell an anti-communist? It's someone who understands Marx and Lenin. Live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, leave the rest to God. Republicans believe every day is the 4th of July, but the Democrats believe every day is April 15th. Sometimes when I'm faced with an atheist, I am tempted to invite him to the greatest gourmet dinner that one could ever serve, and when we have finished eating that magnificent dinner, to ask him if he believes there's a cook. You can tell a lot about a fellow's character by his way of eating jelly beans. Quote, "We don't have $1 trillion debt because we haven't taxed enough. We have $1 trillion debt because we spend too much. We must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawbreaker. It is time to restore the American precept that each individual is accountable for his actions. I know in my heart that man is good, that what is right will always eventually triumph, and there is purpose and worth to each and every life." Government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. I hope we once again have reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. Politics is not a bad profession. If you succeed, there are many rewards. If you disgrace yourself, you can always write a book. It isn't so much that liberals are ignorant. It's just that they know so many things that aren't so. Some people spend an entire lifetime wondering if they made a difference in the world. But, the Marines don't have that problem. Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. Recession is when your neighbor loses his job. Depression is when you lose yours. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his. We will always remember. We will always be proud. We will always be prepared, so we will always be free. Government is not a solution to our problem, government is the problem. It has been said that politics is the second oldest profession. I have learned that it bears a striking resemblance to the first. The future doesn't belong to the light-hearted. It belongs to the brave. Socialists ignore the side of man that is the spirit. They can provide you shelter, fill your belly with bacon and beans, treat you when you're ill, all the things guaranteed to a prisoner or a slave. They don't understand that we also dream. Our natural, inalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation from government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. America is too great for small dreams. The federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. If you analyze it, I believe the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism. I think conservatism is really a misnomer, just as liberalism is a misnomer for the liberals. If we were back in the days of the Revolution, so-called conservatives today would be the liberals and the liberals would be the Tories. The basis of conservatism is a desire for less government interference or less centralized authority or more individual freedom, and this is a pretty general description also of what libertarianism is. Someday, the realm of liberty and justice will encompass the planet. Freedom is not just the birthright of the few, it is the God-given right of all his children, in every country. It won't come by conquest. It will come, because freedom is right and freedom works. It will come, because cooperation and goodwill among free people will carry the day. More than a decade ago, a Supreme Court decision literally wiped off the books of 50 states' statutes protecting the rights of unborn children. Abortion on demand now takes the lives of up to 1.5 million unborn children a year. Human life legislation ending this tragedy will someday pass the Congress, and you and I must never rest until it does. Unless and until it can be proven that the unborn child is not a living entity, then its right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness must be protected. Of the 4 wars in my lifetime, none came about because the U.S. was too strong. To sit back hoping that someday, someway, someone will make things right is to go on feeding the crocodile, hoping he will eat you last, but eat you he will. I have wondered at times what the 10 Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through the U.S. Congress. I've never been able to understand why a Republican contributor is a fat cat, and a Democratic contributor of the same amount of money is a public-spirited philanthropist. Above all, we must realize that no arsenal, or no weapon in the arsenals of the world, is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. Thomas Jefferson once said, "We should never judge a president by his age, only by his works." And ever since he told me that, I stopped worrying. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size. Government programs, once launched, never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. Socialism only works in 2 places: heaven where they don't need it and hell where they already have it. Democracy is worth dying for, because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. I've always believed that a lot of the trouble in the world would disappear if we were talking to each other instead of about each other. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We will preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we will sentence them to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness. If we fail, at least let our children and our children's children say of us we justified our brief moment here. We did all that could be done. Our government needs the Church, because only those humble enough to admit they're sinners can bring democracy the tolerance it requires to survive. Government is like a baby. An alimentary canal with a big appetite at one end and no sense of responsibility at the other. I've always believed that a lot of the trouble in the world would disappear if we were talking to each other instead of about each other. You and I are told we must choose between a left or right, but I suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There is only an up or down. Up to man's age-old dream. The maximum of individual freedom consistent with order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. Regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would sacrifice freedom for security have embarked on this downward path. Remember that every government service, every offer of government-financed security, is paid for in the loss of personal freedom. In the days to come, whenever a voice is raised telling you to let the government do it, analyze very carefully to see whether the suggested service is worth the personal freedom which you must forego in return for such service.